Usually there's a beginner's class from 2 to 4. And then from 4 to 6, then there's a normal class. So when I decide to show up without announcement, surprising everybody, then it can go on all night. Okay, so what I want to say was my coming was unplanned. I didn't let my people know. We didn't make any announcements. Hence, a small, tiny, comfortable little group. Otherwise, you guys are going to be crawling up the walls. It's going to be quite full. During my Dharma talks, as usual, I'm just like you, a normal, ordinary person. But I've studied many, many years under 13, 14 great lamas. And I'm a resident incumbent of the great Ganden Monastery. Currently has 3,000 monks for those of you who are very new. So I came to Malaysia originally because I was requested to come here by my monastery to give teachings, and kind of got stuck here ever since, in a good way. And you guys are not Tibetans. Well, one of you there is half Tibetan. None of you are Tibetans, and I'm here to share the holy Dharma, or holy because it brings a difference in your mind. Not holy because I'm fanatical, but it's holy because it brings a difference in your mind, it brings a purpose, it brings a different train of thought, a different type of thought that might be very beneficial in your lives. And I stress the word it might be. Okay? So I don't need you to go through any of the Tibetan cultural procedures. Okay? First of all, I don't like to see people uncomfortable. So anytime you're uncomfortable, please do stretch out your legs, point your legs at the throne. Do not think that anyone here or behind me or around me gets offended. The Buddhas never get offended. And if your legs is hurting you and your knees are in pain, it's very difficult to listen to a Dharma talk. So the purpose here is not to put you through a Tibetan torture session of legs and pain and meditation and the whole New Age whatever. What I want is your ears and your brain and your eyes, and to absorb something, some information we can share that I've learned for many, many years. Being that you and I are both the same, the difference is that I specialize in my field, you specialize in your field. So if you have an ailment or a sickness, you will go to a renowned doctor to get that diagnosed, prognosis, and also some kind of treatment. Similarly, if you have something in your mind or something you wish to see more in your life, or something that maybe in your life you've done everything and been there and done it, had it, and you're thinking, well, where am I now? Maybe you need to see a shrink or a psychologist. But one step further, if you're not crazy, but you just want more, you think there's more, well, then you would see a Dharma teacher, right? I'm not a very renowned one, but I'm a Dharma teacher. So in any case, you're here to listen, to contemplate, and to share with me on the Dharma what I've learned and what I'm here to share with you. There is no, I'm your guru, you have to listen, and I'm always right and you're always wrong. I don't believe in things like that. But when it comes to Dharma, in this room I think I'm going to be right. You're going to be not as right. Okay? In normal life there's a lot of things I don't know, and I need to learn from you. So similarly, in life there's a lot of things I know also, because although I may be deceivingly, extremely youthful looking, anybody says no to that, I'll get up and punch you. But I've lived quite a few years, and the secret to glamour is never to reveal your age. So I won't tell you that I'm 41. But in any case, my point is this, is I've been around, traveled around, lived many countries, taught many places, and have some experiences. But the experiences were quite different because they were combined with a Dharma kind of thought, a different type of thought. There is miracles in Buddhism. There is incredible feats in Buddhism. There are great lamas with actual clairvoyances, which I've come across. And then there are people who have those powers and at the same time have a lot of logic. And then there's another group of people who actually, sincerely from their heart, have tried to put the mind transformation thoughts of Buddha's teachings into their mind stream and attempt to practice and make their lives and the lives of other people around them better. And I think I would fit into that category. So in any case, This is not an indoctrination session. This is not that I'm right and you're wrong. This is not Tibetan wisdom rules. It isn't anything like that. It's a sharing session. And that's very, very important. So, logic, Dharma, religion should be questioned. Logic, Dharma, religion should be asked. I believe that any religion that doesn't invite questions or invite discussion and debate, there's something insecure about the teacher. I don't think about the religion, but more about the teacher. So I may not know everything, but what I do know, I'll definitely share. What I don't know, I'll investigate and let you know. So what's important is that Buddhism, like all religions, seek to find an answer that pretty much covers many things that we have questions about, many things that perhaps disturb us, many things that perhaps interrupt our lives or interrupt the lives of people around us, or even maybe doing things to us that we don't even know it's doing. And Buddhism, like every other religion, seeks to address that question. And what happens is there are many questions that cannot be answered, but there are also many questions that can be answered. And the questions that can be answered are on our intellectual level that we can perceive. For example, if we have a child that's 6 or 7 years old, there is no possibility you can explain to that child something that you learn in university or college or as a postgraduate or whatever. It's impossible. And it isn't that if the child says, I don't understand, or it doesn't seem right to me, it doesn't mean what you have is wrong. It simply means that the child's ability to perceive and to comprehend is not developed at that time. Similarly, there is knowledge there that's very difficult for us to comprehend. And that is not to say, oh, you're stupid, I'm stupid, and we can't understand it. But it's a logical process of getting knowledge slowly. Slowly. Nothing in your life you've gotten knowledge overnight. Nothing in your life you've learned overnight. Everything that is anything of worthwhileness you have received over a period of time. Similarly, spiritual practice is much, much more higher than any type of knowledge you can try to get or try to acquire in a worldly sphere or in a normal life. Simply for the reason, and I'm very oversimplifying it, is that worldly knowledge and worldly activity benefits to a certain limit in this life, and it definitely cannot benefit us at the time of death or our next life. Worldly knowledge can only give us a certain amount of benefit in this life, and even that benefit is dependent on many causes and conditions. But spiritual knowledge is something that goes deeper than food, deeper than comfort, deeper than friends, deeper than acquiring what you want, deeper than trying to find people to do things your way, or you expect things to be this way or that way. It's much deeper than that. Spiritual knowledge goes deep inside at the core of our being. And in Buddhism, we believe that innately, everyone is very good. Everyone is very well. Everyone has the potential to become someone extremely beneficial. Potential or potentiality in Dharma is very, very important, because when you have something, it can be developed. Like a gold nugget in the ground that can be cleaned, siphoned out of the dirt, and melted, manufactured, and produced into beautiful pieces of jewelry that can be sold very high in the market. Similarly, our mind is like a golden nugget in the ground. A small child, or an ignorant person, or one who is not into gold or able to differentiate between metals or has any knowledge of metals, would find it very difficult to find value in gold. That doesn't mean that intrinsically or inherently that gold does not have value. Gold definitely has value. Now, similarly, since gold has intrinsic or inherent value or worth to the human population, which is bringing wealth, therefore, someone who recognizes that wealth and develops and sifts through and cleans and melts and produces beautiful jewelry can acquire wealth. Like that, if the gold was not gold but it was brass, deceivingly looking like gold but it was actually brass, no matter how much time and energy you would put towards it, you would get very little result. So like that, if we were to develop something You must inherently have something already there to develop. And that potential of development is what we label the Buddha nature, or we have a Buddha inside of us. So when Buddhism talks about each one of us having a Buddha within ourselves, it does not mean we are a separate entity, and within us there's another entity which is a Buddha, and we need to find it, like going through a maze or something. It's not like that at all. That potentiality, or that potential to become a Buddha, a fully enlightened being, is what we call our inherent or intrinsic Buddha nature. And that Buddha nature is temporarily covered, intertwined, intermixed, sullied, whatever word you prefer, with basically the most powerful delusion, ignorance. Arising from ignorance, attachment, desire, and hatred. Anger, hatred, desire, attachment, which arises primarily from ignorance. So if you're going to talk about these three, ignorance, hatred, attachment, desire, from those stem the 84,000 different types of mental aptitudes, or mental directions, or mind, which means, in simpler terms, that Buddha has given account of the type of minds that sentient beings, not human beings, sentient beings, which human is inclusive of that description. Sentient beings or living beings is only part of. And there's different combinations of those minds, different types of combinations. And those combinations arise in 84,000 different types of mental afflictions that make us unhappy, suffer, or stay in suffering, or stay in unhappiness, or go towards suffering, or go towards unhappiness. And it leads us to do it again and again and again, like a moth being attracted to the light but being burned in the process. So, for a split second, the moth is very happy because it's near the light, but the next second it's burned to death. Similarly, our Buddha nature is temporarily like a nugget of gold for many, many lifetimes, obscure. The process of removing the defilements, removing the causes that keep that natural mind, that clear, clean, like mind, or that golden nugget to emerge, is very strong habituation. Very, very, very strong habituation, not only of this life, of many, many, many lifetimes. Many, many lifetimes. So many, many lifetimes of habituation, just like in this life, when we do something over enough, positive or negative, it becomes embedded within our mind stream. When it becomes embedded within our mind stream, we label it very difficult to remove. Very, very difficult to remove. Once we label it difficult to remove, and then we say it's our habit, we've kind of sealed our fate. And then people go to say, well, I'm already 20 years old, I'm 30 years old, I'm 40 years old, I'm 50 years old, I'm 60 years old, I'm 70 years old, on and on and on, and they give many, many excuses for the way they are. But if we look at it from a one life point of view, yes, the habituation can seem very long, very, very long. But when we look at it from a point of view of many lifetimes, it's just a drop in the ocean. A very small drop in the ocean. So this life, if we look at ourselves at this moment, if we don't think of anything, we clear our mind, we look at ourselves at this moment. First of all, we should think how old we are. That's one. Second is, how much time do we have left? Third is, whatever we've accomplished or not accomplished, according to our own upbringing, that's subjective. Whatever we've accomplished and not accomplished in this life, of what value is it at this time to us? If we were to tonight die, close our eyes, have an accident, our plane crashes, car accident, we eat something wrong, we choke, we get robbed, we get shot. If any of these things happen, I pray forbid you that it doesn't, then any of the things that we've done since the time we were born up till now, of what value would that be if today was our last day to live? So we contemplate and we meditate, or we think about that again and again and again. I promise you, many of the disturbances we have around us would cease immediately, because all of that doesn't matter anymore. When we think we're going to live forever, and when we make a problem, we have forever to solve it, or we make someone unhappy, we have forever to take care of it, and we just let it go on and on and on and on, is a clear sign of someone who has done no contemplation on our mortality, or one's mortality, or one's very, very clear and definite fact that we are going to die. If we talk about disease, if we talk about fear, if we talk about robbery, if we talk about many other horrible incidences such as natural disasters and all that might happen to us, it's an iffy. It's maybe. Can be or cannot be. But if we talk about death, none of us is an exception in this room or anywhere. None of us. Great kings and great masters and great lamas and great beings and great actors and great engineers all have died. Some have built great monuments to themselves. It didn't help them. They are never revived and never resuscitated. We're all going to die. So if we are going to go home after this to a very big house, a very big car, if we're going to die tonight, it doesn't help. If we had an argument with someone prior to this and we wanted to be right and we're arguing that we're right, it doesn't matter anymore. If we displease many people, if we make many people unhappy due to our negative habituations, it doesn't matter anymore. What remains for a spiritual person who knows more, who has the meditative power to see beyond, there is a next life. There is a previous life. For those who do not have the analytical basis, inferential logic to directly perceive or indirectly perceive previous lives and next lives, or those without meditational powers to perceive next life or previous lives, for those beings it would just be nihilistic, where nothing exists. But the fact is this, is that if you were to die, what have you done in your life that is of worth and value? If you say you have a few kids, no offense to anyone, animals can have kids. Animals can rear kids and make them grow. That's not a big deal. If you say you had a wonderful marriage, that's not a very big deal either. Nothing to flaunt and nothing to brag about. If you say that you've had great companies and you have billions and billions of dollars in the bank, that's wonderful for you while you're alive, but when you've died, all your time and energy has gone to producing something that cannot help you at the time of death and in future lives. And if you're attractive, then you have become unattractive. What you've been attached to with your body, washing, cleaning, grooming, washing, cleaning, grooming, will become a very horrible, bloated, blue-black, stinking corpse in just a few days' time. So what we're doing is actually we're grooming, we're washing, we're taking care of a walking corpse. That's ourselves. And when we think of our bodies in that way, to some people they may think, why Buddhism so gruesome? Why Buddhism so morbid? Why is it so dark? It's not. You see, we're used to not facing reality. Therefore, we find reality dark. But if we find and we look for reality, you don't find that. Do you see the Dalai Lama was sad? Do you see high lamas or high monks or high nuns or high practitioners sad, unhappy, morbid? But that's what they meditate on. Because they have meditated on the reality of life, which is that life is short and death is around the corner, they change their habit, they change their speech, they change their direction, they change their motivation, they change their whole habituation into bringing happiness for themselves and others because they realize time is short. You will never meet a Tibetan master that's morbid, or that's unhappy, or that's sad, or that's continuously bringing unhappiness to others. You'll never meet that. Why? Because they meditate and contemplate on the realities of life, which is what we've avoided. When we think about death, we don't want to talk about it. When we think about the coffin they're going to put us into, we don't want to think about it. They're going to put us into a coffin. Don't look at it from a third-person point of view. Look at it from a first-person point of view. Visualize the ground being dug up for you. Visualize the coffin box, whatever expenses you want to put on it. Be prepared for you. Think about the last clothes you wish to wear, which doesn't make one difference to anyone, yourself or others, because you can't feel it at all. Think about yourself being interred into that box. Sealed clothes. Not able to move, drink, talk, express, fight, love, ever again. Whatever your feelings are, whatever you're unhappy about, whatever you're disturbed about, whatever you're happy about, whatever you're excited about, whatever you're attached about, will never, ever come to be or come to pass again. And then afterwards, they seal the box, which is your inside. Don't look at the box. look from the box, look from within. They close it. They seal it. And then they put you inside the ground. When they put you inside the ground, they throw the dirt on you. That's if you're not cremated, which is even more horrible. And once you're buried, they put a stone there. And then, you know, we all hate cemeteries, day or night, especially at night. Well, you're going to be there. Your body's going to be there for the rest of whatever. And if you're lucky, you don't become a wandering spirit running around, scaring people. And then they have to come and look for people like me to scare you back. Let's hope that doesn't end up like that. Just kidding. Let's hope you don't become some kind of wandering ghost. But the reason we visualize all that and we meditate, what I just told you is a meditation. I modernized it for you, but that's in the Lamrim text, written by the great Indian master, Jayapandi Atisha, elucidated very clearly by Lama Tsongkhapa, and again taught in one of the greatest teachings ever taught in Tibet by His Holiness Kajip Phobongka Rinpoche, which is compiled in the Lamrim books. So Lamrim means graduated path to enlightenment. Lamrim. So what happens is in these teachings, when we read about it, it seems morbid. It seems scary. It seems like, why do they always talk about death? Why? We talk about death so we can live. We realize death so that we can make others live. If we talk about death and we meditate on death and we think about it again and again and again, I promise you, many of the wonderful things and the wonderful things that you are doing, you will increase it and you'll make it more. And some of the negative things that you feel toward others, or the negative things you have in your mind, knowing the little bit of time you have left, you will let it go immediately. You will become easy, bright, happy, very, very loose people. Loose not as in not caring, loose as in caring, forgiving, and letting the other person win. Immediately. And if you do this on a daily basis, you'll see your happiness grow. Why? You start living your life, your existence, and you deal with people as if it's your last day on this planet. If you believe in the next life, you have the power of analytical meditation, or you have the power of meditation to see into the next life. Logically, inferential logic that is, or meditational wise, by the power of the mind that has reached awareness. Or you don't believe in the next life. It doesn't really matter. Because would you like to leave a legacy behind you of a selfish, self-centered, grasping, money-minded, gruesome person? Or would you like to leave behind a legacy with your children, with your friends, with the people around you, be they 4 people or be they 400 people, of a person that even in death inspires other people towards a higher self? Example, even the Holy Mother Teresa has left this world, but thinking about her inspires us. Thinking about what she has done moves us. Thinking about her or thinking about her deeds leaves a very strong legacy to motivate us to become better, or that we can become better, or it's a message and a light to us that we have that potential. So if you believe, or you can logically see by logic, inferential logic, that there is a future life, then there's much more hope. Much more hope than that. Much more hope. So what happens is, in the mind teachings, Loik, it talks about Kejik. Kejik. Kejik means instantaneous. Just like that. That's kind of like the fastest we can describe Kejik. It's faster than a second. And our time is made up of many of these seconds. Okay, for convenience sake we use the word seconds. So this is a little short. They made this for the short Tibetan Lamas, not for the tall ones. So with my long neck and long torso and all these, I feel like I'm being pulled down. One of these days I'll get $1 million and I'll buy a long one. How's that? So I'll wait for one of you guys to donate it to me. I know, keep waiting, right? Alright, so Kejik is many very fast seconds that are brought together. Your mind, your subtle mind, and your gross mind. You have 2 types of mind. You have a subtle and gross, G-R-O-S-S, mind. The gross mind, listen very carefully, the gross mind is associated with your 5 aggregates: power of hearing, touch, taste, feeling, mind, the 5 aggregates. The gross mind depends on the 5 aggregates to exist, to function, to perceive, to get information, to exist. It depends on the 5 aggregates, which all of us have unless we're blind or deaf or one of those. And what happens is this gross mind arises from a subtle mind. The subtle mind and the gross mind are one. The gross mind is a manifestation of the subtle mind. At death, the gross mind dissolves back into the subtle mind, and the subtle mind leaves our body. Gross and subtle mind are one. It's just classifications on their operation, how they operate. Don't think there's 2. So the gross mind is dependent on the body, suk or lu, on the body in order to exist. Therefore, the gross consciousness of sight, the gross consciousness of sound, taste, touch, feeling, reja, all of that is dependent on our body. So if the body is taken away, the gross mind cannot exist. We have 3 different types of realms within the samsara existence according to Buddha. 3 different types of realms. Form, formless, and desire. We abide within the desire realm. Within the desire realm, planet Earth is one small speck of existence within that. So we don't need to have an over-bloated kind of arrogance. We are the only ones as anybody out there. There's definitely plenty of people out there. There are UFOs, everything. Buddha didn't say, oh, there's little green men coming out of spaceships. But what he did say is that we're only one form of existence within a vast multitude of existences within samsara. So planet Earth is just one teeny little speck. So planet Earth is a speck, imagine us. I don't know, there's no word smaller than that. So within that tiny speck, we exist within the desire realm. What happened? What happened? Sit. Never mind. Let them come up. So, because when you do that, you interrupt everybody. Sit. Never mind. Let them come up by themselves. They'll find their way up. If they can't, we'll charge them a ticket here. We don't go Canada Road here. $50 late. How's that? We'll split the profit. 25? No. 30? 25? No. 30? 20? Okay. He's too smart. He's got a PhD. He's not going to fall for that. He's not as stupid as he looks, I tell you. Definitely he's not. People think he looks stupid, but he's not. When people tell you look stupid, just say, no, I just look that way. Because why? When I wanted to split the profit, 50-50, I said 30-20. He said, no, I'm not that dumb. No, just kidding. You see how evil I am? I blow your mind away what a holy, wonderful, fabulous Tibetan Lama should be. Definitely, I told you I'm not the Dalai Lama. I'm not any of those great guys. I'm just a schmuck who bought my certificate. No, I didn't buy it. You can't bribe those monks. They're too pure. If I say that's not good to them. Okay, anyways, I found it on the roadside. Some great master dropped his certificate. I picked it up and I ran here. So what happens is this is the gross mind. The gross mind arises from the subtle mind. When we die, there are different stages of our death, which I'll teach another day. I like to actually teach that more in detail, that Buddha described. It's quite scientific. It's quite interesting, actually. Interesting in the sense that it's, wow, how they figured this out 2,500 years ago, Buddha didn't even have a stethoscope. In any case, that dissolves into your subtle mind. Proof, a very simplistic proof of the existence of the subtle mind is this. Is when you're sleeping, you dream. When you dream, you see, you hear, you taste, you touch, and with your mind you feel fear. But none of that exists. What are you feeling with? What are you touching with? What are you tasting with? What are you hearing with? What are you looking with? Your eyes are closed, your ears are shut down. For me, I wear earplugs, everything's shut down. The room is closed, the windows are closed. Well, I always close my windows, lock my doors because I have fears of intruders. I won't tell you what type. But everything's closed. Everything's closed. So when it's closed, you still, in your dream, sometimes it's more realistic than life. What are you seeing with? What are you hearing with? What are you perceiving with? That being or that perceiver is your subtle mind. That being or that perceiver gives you clear, positive proof that something exists that does not need your body to see, to hear, to taste, to touch, to feel. That is your mind. Very simple. That light, that mind you can experience. That mind you can experience. It is said, when you sneeze, suddenly your heart stops. When you have sexual peak or orgasm, a very split second, there will be a clear white light or clear light. That is not something on the outside, that is your mind. And at time of death, those 3 times, that subtle mind will appear to you. When you die, that subtle mind will not be something you see on the outside, it is something that you are within. You will see a clear, white, clean, vacuous light. The light is like a womb. The light is very loving and nourishing and very touching. The light is very welcoming, and the light gives you a sense of peace and a sense of happiness and a sense of belonging. And people always in history believe that light to be God or Buddha or angels or deities. It is not. That clear light is your own mind. Those who meditate, during their meditational experiences, there are specific sadhanas. Sadhanas are different types of yogas for the mind, that you can actualize that clear light before you die, which means you'll recognize it, you'll be able to see the signs, and when you recognize you're able to see the signs, you can control your death, or you can have a controlled death. And when you have a controlled death, you don't worry about your wealth, you don't worry about your children, you don't worry about your family, you don't worry about anybody. You think about everyone and how to benefit them. And when you enter that clear light of death, you're able to eject from your body or leave your body at will when you like. For what? To show off in front of everybody? What's the point? What's the point of doing a Houdini thing? Once you're dead, you're dead. No one can even give you money you're going to pay for. That's not the point. The point is not to have an uncontrolled rebirth. Not to have an uncontrolled next life. Not to have something uncontrolled that you cannot control. To enter death in darkness and in fear. So those sadhanas are very precious. Kala Chakra Sadhana, Yamataka Sadhana, Chakra Samvada Sadhana, Vajragini Sadhana, Guhya Samaja. Those great sadhanas, there are many more, are very implicit texts and meditational manuals that teach you how to prepare yourself for death by living your life correctly. It isn't a bunch of rules. It isn't a bunch of rules. Oh, you're vegetarian on this date. Oh, you have to chant on this time. You have to get up at this time. You have to meditate this much. You have to recite this. You have to pray to this Buddha. No, it's not that. It's a guided meditational manual where you need to go inside yourself. That only comes after a few years of practice with a meditation teacher. And the teacher checks you out. Unmotivated by money, fame, popularity, or gain, out of great compassion, the teacher passes you one of these great sadhanas through initiation. And when you're conferred the initiation and you hold the rites and you hold the vows and you do the proper offerings that support the actual practice, you're able to gain meditation experience into controlling your death, into controlling where you go and what happens to you. And in the process of that, you're able to overcome your attachment for money, lust, desire, anger, winning, pride, ego. You're able to let go. Why do you need to let go? Because it doesn't benefit you at the time of death. It becomes a burden. It holds you back. It holds you back very much. So what happens is, those come after years, depending on your teacher, of examining you, whether you're ready or not. Some people just stumble into initiation, they get it, doesn't mean they're ready. Doesn't mean they're ready or not. After years of following one teacher, with confidence and faith, the teacher, not, everybody runs around saying, I'm going to check my teacher out. Correct, you should. But the teacher also checks you out. Whether you're a proper vehicle to pass those type of teachings too. So prior to that, the teacher prepares you. The teacher compassionately and kindly, through many skillful ways, attempts or actually prepares you. One who cooperates with the teacher, is likened to a sick person who cooperates with their doctor for treatment and healing. One who doesn't cooperate with their teacher for their inner journey, we're talking about inner journey here, we're not talking about anything else. One who does not cooperate is likened to a sick person who does not listen to the doctor's advice. So if your disease becomes worse or becomes fatal or you die from it, the doctor is not to be blamed, neither is the nurse. It is yourself. Similarly, if you've been listening to Dharma for many years and inwardly you have not transformed, you have not changed, it cannot be the fault of your teacher. Why? If your teacher is at fault, surely the Buddha cannot be at fault. Surely the Dharma books cannot be at fault. So your lack of transformation cannot be blamed on an outer cause. It has to go within oneself by logic. By logic. So what happens is this. When your gross aggregates dissolve into your subtle aggregates, there's a process. Your mind will leave your body. It will take rebirth. Now what happens is this. Your subtle mind, we say in Tibetan, it operates on a very quick basis, very fast, secondary, split second. These split seconds are many. They're not one, and they're continuous. So logically, it is 6:20 approximately right now. At 6:20, if I just walk into the room, I saw all of you, I don't need proof that you existed at 6:19. I don't need proof that you existed at 6:18 or 6:15 or 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or yesterday. Because you're here, I can very inferential logic, which means indirect logic, say you were here, you're alive. Very simple. So like that, if you were here today, you must have been here yesterday. Similarly, let's say if you're 30 years old, you've been logically here for 30 years. And then 9 months inside your mother's womb. Now, when you were inside your mother's womb, existence didn't start there at all. Your physical body came from your parents, the blood and the sperm of your parents, and that grew from other substances being fed into it, and from that it grows. But your mind didn't come from that. Why? If your mind came from that, there's a lot of proof that negates that kind of thinking. Example, physically you may resemble your parents, and the way you eat, the way you talk, the way you do certain things may resemble your parents, but that doesn't mean your mind came from them. That simply means being close to an environmental cause or environmental kind of habituation. Which means if you look at something or look at someone all the time, you're impressionable, you start to do things like them, but doesn't mean you think like them. Example, there are very intelligent parents that come out with kids that are not intelligent. You have very not intelligent parents with kids that come out super intelligent. Then you have parents who are saints, religious, and very kind and very wonderful, and their kids come out to be highway robbers, or very difficult druggies, or addicts, or people that harm other people. Now, if their mind came from their parents, they have to be exactly like their parents. Or their parents is wonderful, they have to be wonderful. If they're not wonderful, it is logically to say their parents are not wonderful. Why? If you came from your parents, that's negated out. Completely negated out. So therefore, there are some parents that are very, very spiritual. And there are some kids that couldn't be bothered. And there are some kids who are very spiritual, there are parents that couldn't be bothered. So like that, it logically negates that your mind comes from your parents. So therefore, let's say you were conceived at like 12 a.m. Okay, your father and mother got together, they did their little thing, and you were conceived at 12 a.m. At 12 a.m., the sperm and the blood mixed. Your two cells became two. It's going to start multiplying to create you. You're a 2-cell being or 3-cell being, whatever. At that second, your physical body began to exist. I put that in inverted commas, I'll talk about that later. It began to exist. But your mind also at that time entered into that conception. When your mind had entered into that conception, let's say you were conceived at 12 a.m., where were you at 11:59 p.m.? Where were you at 11:58 p.m.? If you were conceived at 12 a.m. on Wednesday, where were you on Tuesday? Where were you on Monday? Where were you on Sunday? So therefore, it is logical to assume that our mind is on a secondary basis and is very quick. Because if we exist this moment, if we can think, perceive, touch, feel, like, and dislike at this moment, we definitely could have perceived, like, dislike, and all that the previous moment, and so on and so on. Like that, at the moment of conception, we know where your body came from, but where did your mind come from? It couldn't have come from nowhere. Illogical. It couldn't have come from your parents. We just have negated that out with logic again. That's how the Buddha taught us. That's how the Buddha spoke. That's how we are taught in the monasteries. We don't just sit there and chant, yodel in the Himalayan mountains. No, there's a lot of philosophical thought and meditation, contemplation, and debate to think about the subjects. People think Tibetan lamas fly in the sky, they yodel in the mountains, and they can melt on snow. Some of them can, but I'm not interested in melting snow. You know, if I want to get a hairdryer and melt snow, I don't need to do that with my body. I don't want to sit in the mountains naked and melt snow. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? Hairdryers can melt snow, so I don't need to be a hairdryer, do I? But what we need is logic here. You don't want to spend your whole life meditating, getting the power of tumo or heat, and then you sit in the mountains, you can melt snow. Big deal. Somewhere they take pictures of you naked. Do some of you want to be seen naked? I mean, look at yourself. Do you think you want to be naked? Pictures taken? I wouldn't. I've seen myself naked. I wouldn't want anyone else to see me naked. And I don't want to be mean, but some of you I won't want to see naked either. So, what happens is this. So if you were conceived at 12 a.m., where were you at 11:59? You had to be somewhere at 11:59 to exist at 12. Your previous life. And then let's say your previous life, exactly the same process, was 60 years, 70 years. Where were you before that? Your other previous life. Your previous life, your previous life, your previous life, and it goes on. Similarly, in this life, with respect to all of you, when you die, and I don't wish that or want that or even want to go near that, wish you all long life, but when we finally, in this life, throw in the towel, let's say we throw in the towel at 4 p.m. Where will you be at 4:01? Your body is like the process of water, evaporation, cumulus clouds, precipitation. And then again, water, evaporation, precipitation. It never ends, it's a cycle. That's the same thing with our body. Our body rots down into the ground and it develops into something else. From it, it grows something else. It continues. It never actually is destroyed. It's just that it's so minute when it's cremated that when you throw it in the ground, it looks like nothing. It's not. Our body comes from that and it goes back to that, but not our mind. So if you die at 4 p.m., where will you be at 4:01? Where will you be at 4:02? 5 o'clock? If you die on Tuesday, where will you be on Wednesday, Thursday? Hence your future life. So if there is this logical process, what we call in Dharma or Buddhism is inferential logic. Inferential means not having the capacity to be able to perceive something directly, but using indirect evidence to conclude something until we can get to a higher level. That indirect evidence and that inferential logic to perceive something, you're not stuck there your whole lifetime. You'll reach a point in your meditation that you can perceive directly. You don't need hallucinogens, you don't need drugs, you don't need, these things that American Indians take to go on a trip. It's not that. Tibetan lamas don't take drugs to see their previous life. Some Tibetans take drugs, too bad for them, but not the Tibetan lamas that I know. You don't need that. Your mind has the capacity to perceive. Example. This example is one of my favorites, but it's very clear and logical. If I asked you, today is what day? Sunday. If I asked you, okay, last Monday, all of you tell me immediately what you had for lunch last Monday. Tell me now. Of course you can't remember. You can't remember not because you forgot, because your mind is flustered. Your mind is not at peace. Now if we sit down and we relax and we start going back and there's not music playing around, there's no people running around, none of you are standing there naked, scaring us, and none of that. You're just calm and everything's alright. And then you start thinking, who was I with? Who was I hanging around with? What was I doing? And you say, oh yeah, I was with so-and-so and we went to this restaurant. I had this food. You'll be able to remember. What is that? It is your mind calming down. In that same type of process, your mind can calm down to the point of remembering things in your childhood that ordinary people cannot remember. Not remembering things in your childhood is not because you've forgotten, because it's very far away. So if you're 10, you can remember what happened to you when you're 2 or 3. When you're 20, it becomes vague. When you're 30, very vague. When you're 40, good luck. When you're 50, it was another life. When you're 60 and 70, even you don't recognize yourself in pictures. Was I that cute and plump? What happened to me? Very logical. So like that, we can remember. Why? In the West now, it's very big, is regression therapy, where people put you under hypnosis and you can remember your childhood very clearly. What is that? That is simply, they tell you, you're getting sleepy. It's actually meditation for you to calm down. Quick meditation, externally induced. You can do the same thing to yourself with meditation. You can internally induce yourself to calm down, where your mind is calm, you can reflect and remember every detail of your life, even when you're very young. Definitely you can. Why? It is in your memory. So like that, if your mind is a continuity, it is unbroken. If you calm your mind down through meditation, you will be even able to remember your time inside your mother's womb. Oh, definitely. Why not? You had a mind in your mother's womb. What do you think, your mind entered you when you came out of your mother? You come out, the mind enters? I don't think so. That's illogical. When you came out of your holy and very beautiful mother, you must have already had a mind. So if you had a mind inside your mother, why can't you remember? Of course you can remember. You can't remember seeing because your eyes are closed, your ears are not functioning, but sensation you can remember. If she drinks something hot, it burns you. If you drink something cold, you feel cold. If she jumps or moves, you feel some pain. You can feel that sensation, and you can remember it. Definitely you can. And then if you can remember the time inside your mother's inside her womb, you definitely can remember the time when you just entered her, and the time before that, because it's a continuity. So therefore, you can remember your previous lives. And the life before that, and the life before that. Remembering your previous lives is nothing spectacular or fabulous. It is just a byproduct of a type of meditation called Shine, or awareness meditation. Awareness. Those who do awareness meditation, those are very aware. They see things that are happening around them. They can look into a room, everything around them, they can perceive what's happening. It's not clairvoyance, it's just clarity of the mind. They know what that person doing, what they're seeing, what is going on, something's dropping here, something here, they hear something. They're very clear and they're very sharp. Those who are not very aware, they're always blurred. They knock things over, they hit people, they step on things, they drop things, they always forget things, they always say, I'm sorry, I forgot. Why? That's a clear person who's always existing in a state of blur. A person who's not existing in a state of blur, they are very clear of all the things around them and what's happening. The clarity around them is incredible. Incredible clarity. Unbelievable clarity. And that clarity is definitely possible. By meditation meaning sitting in a lotus posture with your hands folded, wearing some orange robe hanging out somewhere in a cave? No. Meditation is a state of mind. Although body posture and body position does play a small part in beginner's meditation, because there are energies in our body that can help us to develop our mind faster. Example, if we were to write a book, if we were to figure out a mathematical problem in the middle of the intersection of the street trying to not get run over, it's not going to be that easy because our mind cannot concentrate. Whereas we're in a quiet, air-conditioned room with a nice milkshake, well, for me, that would be very relaxing, wouldn't it? Similarly, meditation is a state where you can bring your mind to that relaxed calm. But the goal is not always to be in a cool, cold, air-conditioned room with a milkshake. The goal is that anywhere you can bring that mind active, and that is called awareness. All the time, everything around you, you're very aware. Your ear is very clear, your eyes are very sharp, your mind is crisp. Whether you had enough sleep, whether you're sick, whether you're not sick, whether you're unhappy, whether things are going your way or not, your mind is very clear, very crisp, very sharp, very fast. And with that type of meditation, you can achieve clairvoyance. Why? Clairvoyance is a higher state of awareness, where things around you can be perceived very quick and very fast. Definitely it's possible. So like that, if you had a previous life, which I have just indicated to all of you, on the basis of the text that we studied in the monastery called Logic, or the Mind, Logic, Mind. Then, if you have a previous life, you definitely can have a next life. If you have a previous life and you have a next life, what determines positive or negative? What determines how pleasant and unpleasant your experiences will be in this life and previous life? Now, in Buddhism, we do not accept or deny a monotheistic being that controls everything in the universe. We don't accept that. We don't accept, we don't not accept, we don't dwell on that. We don't dwell on it because it's something that doesn't benefit us at this moment. Meaning, the existence or not the existence of God is not a very important issue in Buddhism. It's not. If the existence and acceptance of the existence of a God is an importance, then you have to prove to us or show us that there is an importance. Example, accepting the existence of a God would mean cessation of suffering, cessation of difficulties and problems and disasters. Accepting an existence of a God does not cessate or cut out or stop any type of suffering. In fact, people going on pilgrimage get killed. So that doesn't make sense. Like that, if we have a previous life, we have this life, some of us are very healthy. Some of us are attractive. Some of us are tall. Some of us are short. Some of us are sickly. Some of us are perpetually fat. Some of us are perpetually skinny. Some of us have a lot of anger. Some of us is very calm. Some of us are artistic. Some of us are not. Why? Did that come from our parents? Illogical. Why is it illogical? There are many people's parents who couldn't draw with both their hands, and there are some kids who can draw just with their feet, and vice versa. There are child prodigies that come out, they're incredible in doing music or drawing or arts or creativity or composing or writing. Incredible child prodigies, many around the world. That is an accepted scientific fact. Where does that knowledge come from? It doesn't come from their parents. So like that, if there's all this disparity or inequality as we perceive it, or that's a good label to put on it at this time, inequality in the world, where does that inequality arise from? If we believe in a monotheistic type of all-pervasive being that controls, then what determines who is born and who is born where and what are they to have? This God? If that's the case, on what basis are we to be put in what existence in our lives? And where we're born, how much we suffer and not suffer, how much we have and don't have? On what basis? Why is it some people hang out in the forest, starving to death, die young, or always in civil wars or in natural disasters they have no control over? Accepting a God or accepting Buddha or not doesn't change one single iota in their life. What is that? So we have to come to conclude that individually we have different types of experiences. Individually we have different types of perceptions and likes and dislikes, and positive and negative experiences that must come from another force. Some of us put very little effort and we do very well in business. Some of us work very hard and we do very badly in business. So it couldn't be effort alone. It couldn't be effort. Some people are very educated, but they don't make it. Some people are educated, they make it very well in life. Some people are not educated. I know people who make it very well in life. So what's the determining factor? So the logical conclusion must be self-created acts, which is cause and effect, or in a nutshell, karma. Karma is actions that we have created from our mind, that are stored within our mind, that are carried over from life after life after life, that according to environmental conditions, they open up and they determine what's going to happen to us. Some Chinese people like to call it fate. Tibetans don't like to call it fate, because fate means sealed. It's not sealed. If your predicament is sealed, then we would not have to teach Buddhism. We would not have to teach about enlightenment. We do not have to teach about becoming a Buddha. Why? Your fate is sealed. If your fate can be changed, we talk about enlightenment, we talk about Buddha, we talk about becoming a Buddha. Why is that? Because your fate can be changed through rehabilitation, through knowledge, through learning. From knowledge and learning, rehabilitation, your fate can be changed. Your circumstances can be changed. You yourself can be changed. When you yourself are changed, everything around you changes. Everything. We may be very comfortable at this moment with our jewelry, with our car, with our house, with our clothes, with what we have, with our food and dinner we're going to have after this. We may be very comfortable. How many years have we been doing that? What benefit does it bring us? The question here is not to engage in that or not. The question here is that it? Is that it? Is that all? Illogical. Totally illogical. In Dharma, Dharma means correct conduct. Dharma doesn't only refer to Buddha Dharma. It refers to any type of Dharma that's correct conduct. But in particular to Buddha Dharma, or Buddha's teachings, it operates on logic, thinking, discussion, and talk. Because Buddha told you to listen to the words that are spoken and accept it on the basis of analysis, like a goldsmith to gold. by burning, by rubbing, by testing. Do not be dazzled by the speaker, which in his case he meant the Buddha, or his brilliance, or his attainments, or his enlightenment. But be sure that his words prove sound in your mind. When it proves sound in your mind, then faith is born. Faith born of logic brings results. Faith born of fear, illogic, ignorance, or simple not checking brings no results. Hence, fanatics. You have Buddhist fanatics, Christian fanatics, you have fanatics in all religions who simply follow what someone says, or simply follow ridiculous philosophies that were never taught. What are ridiculous philosophies? Anything that hurts another being is ridiculous. Any religion that teaches harm to another, whatever justification, is ridiculous and illogical. Because why? We don't need religion to teach us to kill, to steal, to lie, to cheat. We're doing very well on our own. Why would we need a religion to tell us to kill our neighbor if he hurts us? We don't need that, because we know animals do that. If we go onto their territory, they're going to bark at us, they're going to bite us, they're going to gnaw us apart. Humans should be better. So we don't need a religion to teach us how to be evil, nasty, hurt people, and damage people. Religion is the science of the mind, which gives you a logical explanation of your state of mind and where you exist and how you exist. And by understanding, we rehabituate. By daily rehabituation, through meditation, moving the energy channels in our body through chanting, through contemplation, we'll see a definite difference in mind. Definite difference in our mind. What do we want to achieve in religious practice? In all religious practice. In this case, let's focus on Buddhism since we're here. What do we wish to achieve in religious practice? Is that from last year, the year before, the year before that, the year before that, we see a substantial change in our mind. We're less angry. We're less attached to money. We forgive easier. We see the more importance in life, which is not food, or husband and wives, or a house, or a country, or a name, or a position. Those are not important. We've had that. It doesn't get us anywhere. What is important is our state of mind. What have we been doing for the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What have we been doing? Is our mind exactly the same as it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Angersome? Jealous? Petty? Small? Complaining? Is it still like that? Or is it more forgiving? More easy? Let go? Are we still in need of the same things we needed 20, 30, 40 years ago to feel, in inverted commas, secure? Are we still attached, or we've let go? I'm not talking about basic necessities such as food and a comfortable house, and in medicine when you're sick, a comfortable bed. I'm not talking about those. Those everybody needs. I'm talking about, oh, I still need a husband. I still need a wife. I still need a partner. I still need this clothes. I need this brand. I need this jewelry. I need this building. I need this place. I need to have this title, this name, and then I will be happy. Are you, at your age, still looking for that? If at your age you're still looking for comfort and security and things that do not bring that, then your mind has not progressed. And that's how you can check how you've used your life, positively or negatively. So as the years go by, are you a source of inspiration for people around you? When you show up, you bring happiness to people. Is your advice adhered to, or people run away from you? As the years go by, are you a presence of inspiration to other people? Is your presence, when you speak, people admire you and say, wow, you know? Or are you someone that people don't pay attention to, run away from, avoid, not interested in? And if you have so-called wisdom to disperse, that people are not there to listen to, then that's not people's fault, that is your fault. Because why? You have lived your life in such a way that you have chased after things that have no significance. Wine, women, and song. I mean, to make a long story short. For women, shopping, clothes, and diamonds. I know that's a little feminist, a little biased, I'm just kidding. A little chauvinistic, rather, chauvinistic. My point is this, is that if now, in this point of your life, You're still trying to win an argument with people, and that's the most important thing. If you're faced with someone and you have some kind of debate and you have to win, and if you don't win, you're not happy. And you're not happy with that person. When they see you, when you see them, you make them upset, they make you upset, and you're still doing that year after year after year. You're 40, you're 50, you're 60, you're 70, you're still trying to win. You wasted your life. Because that's what you needed 30, 40, 50 years ago. Why are you still at that level? Why do you still need to win? When we look at a person, we want them sagely, loving, with wisdom, and to impart things. In fact, people who've lived a while should not be asking for advice, they should be giving advice. If you're still asking for advice, something's seriously wrong. If you're giving advice, not you force it down people's throats, you better listen to me because I'm smarter than you, that's not advice. Then something's wrong. So that's how you can check. That's a yardstick. That's not criticism of anybody. That is a yardstick according to Lam. It's a yardstick. How to check what you've done with your life. So when we close our eyes for the last time, we never open them again. What have we done with our lives? Have we eaten, slept in nice places, had nice partners and friends, and that's it? That's no better than an animal. What have we done for the last 5 years? What have we done for the last 10 years? What have we done for the last 20, 30 years? What have we done? This is not something someone else asks you. This is something you ask yourself. What have you done? And what have you done? Are you still looking for the same thing now? If you're looking for the same thing now, you're in serious trouble. Because why? This need, this search, this perpetual drinking salt water to quench the thirst will carry over to you when you're old, when you're dying, and into your next life. And the cycle goes on and on and on and on, never cut. Hence it's called samsara, a cyclic or cycle of existence. You have the power to cut that out. You have that power. It's up to you. So you have to think, spiritual practice is not going to place in chanting and knowing the stuff and debating. What is spiritual practice? Let me define it for you right now. Clear and simple, straightforward. How much has your mind changed from negative to positive? And don't tell me that it's changed this much, minute. Why? You don't have time for your mind to change minutely. Each time your mind doesn't change, you exist in anger, in desire, in attachment, in greed. Each moment your mind exists in that is rehabituating those negative qualities, which will take you to a negative state of rebirth. Never mind, negative state of rebirth, which some of you may not accept at this time. In this life, it brings you to a negative state of existence. With people around you, with your spouse, with your friends, with everybody around you. Why? Nobody wants to be around an angersome, hateful, selfish, greedy, miserly, calculative person. No one. No one. Even I don't. I'm sorry. No one. So in this life, you're not happy having that kind of mind. Whether it's with your children, maybe with the children, with a few people, you can force it down their throats to accept you, but it doesn't mean they accept you from their heart. So in this life, if you can transform that state of mind, and I'm not talking about minutely 1%, 2%, I'm talking about drastically change. You have pursued spiritual practice correctly. If you're still exactly like you are, or minutely changed or slightly changed, don't sit there and pat yourself on the back. Well, I've changed. I haven't changed that much, but I've changed. Look, what you've changed, happy birthday to you. What you have not changed is what will drag you down. So if you're still interested in money, give me money, business money, give me money, I'll sleep for it, I'll eat it, I'll do anything you want, give me money. If that's what you're interested in, that's not bad. But will it help you? People tell you it's bad to want money. I love money. You can throw it at me, throw it at me, man. Give me money. When I'm done with teachings, I expect thick ones like this. It better not be $1 bills, by the way. US dollar can. I love money, you love money. But if we keep looking for money, that's great, but, is that the answer? I know hundreds of people, I've met thousands of people, because of what I do. And I know people who have millions and millions and billions, some billions of dollars. And they are the most unhappiest people and the most scared and insecure people I've ever met. When they come inside the audience room to meet me, they close the door, they cry immediately. They'll give me any amount to help them. Of course, I'm tempted to take it, but I'm thinking about karma next life. You give me $1 million, you'll be happy. It doesn't tip my tongue, but I dare not, because you know what? One of these days I have to see the Dalai Lama, and he's going to look right through me and say, you've been naughty. What am I going to say? I mean, Dalai Lama's not like a stupid schmuck like me. He's pretty up there, you know, in higher attainments. Sorry, they sent the bottom of the barrel to Malaysia and me. What to do? We can find something at the top of the barrel, happy birthday, I go back to the beach and relax. No, I hate the beach, the mountains. I don't like the beach because it'll make my fair skin dark. You guys have that hang up, I don't. So, if you still have a hang up, when you talk with anybody, who is right and who is wrong? For the last 20 years, 30 years, 40, some of you are 50, 60 years old, you still want to be right, you still want to talk about it, you want to explain yourself. Take a break from yourself. What difference does it make what you explain? What difference does it make people understand you or not? The important thing is, do you understand yourself? Do you understand yourself, meaning what? What you're doing to yourself when you do that. I don't want to use these big new age words and say, oh, here we are, you know. Do you understand yourself means what? Let me define. It means when you do those kind of actions, do you understand how much unhappiness it brings yourself and others? If you do, why do you continue? So if you're attached to money, some of us are very attached to money. Some of us are very attached to form, you know, nice clothes, nice form. Some of us are very attached to good food. You know, it's a big issue where they eat, what kind of food, why, what kind of food. Unless you have a health problem, you take care of your food. If you don't, just flow with it. You know, flow with it. No problem. I mean, I don't advise you to eat McDonald's every day, you know. But I don't also advise you to go on macrobiotics every single day too, because I'm on macrobiotics right now. Let me tell you, it's delicious because I'm telling myself it is. It's delicious. Not just eat it, you know, I train myself, it's delicious. But trust me, I like to have sweet and sour chicken every single day, and Big Macs, and Wendy's burger, that's what I've been dying for. You know, of course I didn't kill the cow, so it's not bad karma, that's what the Buddha says, so, you know, it's alright with me. Let's not get into that vegetarian debate. We can talk about higher things right now. Not that animals don't matter, they do matter. You see, I prove it. I brought some vegetarian books to give away to people in case people are interested. Anyways, so you gotta check yourself. What is spiritual practice if your same hang-ups have been continuing up to now? Are you still making excuses? When I make my $1 million, I'm going to do Dharma. When I make my $1 million, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Are we? Are we still breaking commitments? We make promises to people? Oh, I'm sorry, you break your commitments and then you just continue making broken commitments. Are we still the same? Are we still angersome? If we're still angersome, never mind they say, oh, you're a Buddhist now, you're still so angry with it. Never mind what they think and say, that's another form of attachment. But are you happy being unhappy? Are you happy making other people unhappy? And yeah, it doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. It doesn't really matter. You know what's right or wrong? What is right or wrong is how happy you feel and unhappy. And happy and unhappy is not determined solely on an outer physical environment. It is definitely a state of mind. How is it a state of mind? It is a state of mind through development and rehabilitation. How does rehabilitation development come along? Let me share with you. By getting knowledge. How do you get knowledge? Exactly what we're doing right now. These 1-2 hours you're spending with me are very precious. Not because you're listening to me babbling away on the throne, but I'm nothing special. But what I have to share with you is very special because it comes from a living, genuine lineage. In Tibetan Buddhism, we believe in a lineage. What is a lineage? Let me explain to you in brief. It is not making up your own teachings. It is not fooling people with spiritual advice that you've thought up in the middle of the night where you're walking down the street and an idea came to you. It is based on sound, logical masters and practices. And they were practiced by their masters and their masters and their masters, and their masters go back to Lord Buddha himself. That is called a lineage. Any teachings that a Tibetan master gives must be based on an authentic lineage. No Tibetan master, if he is a real master, can make up teachings or simply just pull something out of a hat and explain it to you. Why? You can rob people. They can make their money back. You can hit someone and knock them down. They can stand up again. You can dye their hair the wrong color and they can grow out or re-dye it. You can steal the shirt, they can get another shirt. But if you teach them something wrong for their mind and their spirituality, you've destroyed them. And that's not something we can ever take a chance with because the mind is very precious. Therefore, Tibetan teachers must teach with a lineage. What is that? An authentic lineage where they receive their teachings from, where they receive their source from, and their teachers have taught them that. Their teachers have practiced that, and it's taught out of practice, not pure knowledge. And then their teachers and their teachers and their teachers. In higher teachings such as initiations, it is absolutely crucial to have a lineage. Nothing can be made up. So therefore, during teachings, higher teachings, in general oral transmissions, the teacher must state where they received the teachings from. In my case, I received it from Grand Master, the great Geshe Tsurum Gyaltsen, who is now 80 years old, who resides in Los Angeles. And I received his teachings from His Holiness the Great Kajaswaramji, based on the three principal paths, His Holiness Gamin Chidamji. These teachings I received over and over. So you can't make these things up, you can't say things. You can use new words and new examples, but the principle must stay the same. So in Dharma, in Tibetan form of Buddhism, nothing can be made up. You don't just read it out of a book. No teacher can say, hey, you know what? I had a date with Lama Tsongkhapa and he told me all these things. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But you see, for other people, they don't understand if you did or not, and that can be dangerous. Maybe you really did have lunch with Lama Tsongkhapa and he told you these things and you're explaining things to me. Maybe you did. But then that would make it okay for everybody else to say, I had lunch with Lama Tsongkhapa and he told me this too, and you're going to have freaks coming in telling all kinds of things. So then what happens? It gets blown out of proportion. So in the Tibetan form of Buddhism, which makes it very authentic, is what? Is that you don't make anything up. It must have come from your master. And it cannot come from your master who had visions. There are masters who have visions, and they had powers. But it cannot be based on that. It has to be based on their master, logical debate, and you can sound it out. And then their master, it must originate from Lord Buddha, and you can debate it out. You can never tell people, oh, I see it, and you don't see it, and therefore you have to believe me. Oh, you know, among the Chinese, the famous saying around here, they have the special eye, or the third eye, or the ghost eye. They can see things you can't see. I'm sorry. Maybe you're a ghost, or a reincarnation of a ghost. That's why you can see other ghosts. Seeing ghosts is actually a bad sign in Buddhism. If you can see ghosts, and you can see deities, you can see all these things, it's a very bad sign. Very, very bad sign. Why? Seeing them would precipitate in Buddhist practice. Buddhist, you have some sort of level of compassion, some level of forgiveness, and some level of extreme kindness. If you have that kind of extreme kindness, forgiveness, and love and compassion, if you see these beings, it's beneficial. If you don't, and you say you see these beings, you destroy the Dharma. Why? People look at your actions. The way you act and what you see, does it match? How can you see Buddhas, but you cheat people? How can you have dreams about the future, but you lie to people? If you say like that, then that is to say that Buddhas give signs to people who are not qualified to have signs. Impossible. Because the sign coming from the Buddha is not from the side of the Buddha, it comes from our side. From our side. So therefore, spirituality is of the spirit. What is the spirit? Is the mind. Is how much you have transformed. And we have to stop making excuses for how much we have not transformed. Because why? Time is short. Life is short. And do we wish to go on with death, next life, empty-handed? Literally empty-handed. Is that what we want? Think about everything you have in the bank, at your house, in whatever, in investments. How will that help you at the time of death? And that is not to say, oh, don't have it. That's not the point either. The point is, your point of focus is the development of the mind. Because the mind can be taken with you. The mind. So when you pass away, it is your mind and what is developed that will pass into the next life. And if in this life you're like that, in your next life you'll probably be the same. Look at yourself now to know what you were in your previous life. Look at what you're doing now to know what you're going to be in your next life. Very clear. So if you're very attached to food, to sleep, to sex, most likely you will take rebirth as an animal. Not because you're bad. Those are the traits of the causes of taking rebirth as an animal. So if you like sleeping, you like food, you're very particular about that, and you like, well, let's not say sex because we're in the temple, let's say boobali. Alright, if you like boobali a lot, and that's all you're interested in. I mean, that's all, nothing else, that's it, you live for it, you know. you'll probably take rebirth as an animal. Because why? Those are the traits of an animal. And you create causes for them. If you're angersome, you always want to be right, and every day you find fault with people. You complain, you gossip, you talk about people. Behind their back, even people who benefit you, even people who help you, even people who show you love and compassion, you still backbite and you say negative things about them. And whatever they do for you is never enough. If you're that type of person full of anger, ungrateful, all the time, it'll be most likely in your next life you'll take rebirth, if it's human, in a very unattractive, dark form. Dark doesn't mean skin color. Dark in persona, dark in look. Very unpleasant, very nasty, very not nice looking person. When people see you on sight, they don't like you. Or if it's very severe in one of the hells. Of course, it's not permanent. You come out when that karma is exhausted. If you're always interested in money, you hoard it. You want it. You don't want to share it. You're calculative about it. Your focus is money. And everything about you is money, 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 money. But you say you're practicing Dharma. There's a double damage there. Why? You bring the Dharma down. People who hoard money, who are interested in money, who always focus on money, they're very difficult for them to secure sponsorship for the Dharma. Very difficult for them to secure help or any kind of financial help for the Dharma. Why is that? They don't have the energy of sharing. When people go near them, they don't have the karma to receive, to get. So consequently, there are around 20,000 rich people. If they ask for opening a lawyer firm, they open up a egg farm, they open up some business, they'll get the money. Why? Those are businesses that bring them down, that bring negative karma. They'll get money for that very easy. But for higher things, positive things, example, Dharma institutions that benefit people, it's very difficult for them to secure money. Why? They themselves create the causes not to get, give, receive, take on the karma of giving. They don't have that merit. They don't have that karma. And those people are likely to become more rich, have more and more money. Unfortunately, their state of being is the same as if someone had no money. Why? They're not able to spend it. And it causes them pain. And the more they have, they suffer even more and they become even miserly. And as age takes over, they can go insane. And they'll alienate people around them. But definitely, they're not able to secure money from other people. Why? They don't have the giving energy. If you talk about sharing, giving, and charity, and you don't give, you don't do, why do you think that other people will be affected by your talk? You have to practice what you preach. You have to practice what you preach. So if you're very attracted to money, hoarding money, getting wealth, and especially at the expense of others with a lot of mind games, very definite. You will take rebirth either in a very poverty-stricken area where the very means of life is very difficult. Then you think in many places around the world you see these type of people. No matter what they do, I'm sorry, they're in poverty. Why? No matter what their government does, no matter what their country does, what their village does, they're always in poverty, mired in poverty. Why? There must be a cause that resembles the result. There must be a cause that resembles the result. And worst case scenarios, they take rebirth as spirits that wander perpetually, very hungry, very thirsty, for the time for that karma to exhaust. So these actions we do, we gain some temporary benefit. We think we get benefit. If we listen to the Dharma, we have to practice. If our teacher advises us not to do that, we don't wait till tomorrow, next week, next year. We got to do it now. Otherwise, why have a teacher? Why be in Dharma? Why do Dharma work? You're doing well creating negative karma on your own. Why? If you're around a Dharma teacher, why fight the Dharma teacher? If you're around a Dharma teacher, why protest and not follow what he says? If your teacher is sincere and real, if he is sincere and real upon examination, then you should follow wholeheartedly the teachings he gives you. Why? If they are based on the correct lineage and logical, they will do nothing but benefit you. If you don't, why go through the motions of practicing but you don't? So we have to think, how old am I? What have I accomplished that is different than an animal with respect to everyone? That is in the words of Pabong Rinpoche, by the way. And where am I going to? That's what we need to think. If we think about that and fear arises, very good. That type of fear will make us do something more with our lives. There's much more than just going for dinner, going for watching a nice TV show and going to sleep and that's it, and then, just plodding through life blur. Much, much more. Much more. Today I have given you a very small drop in the oceanic teachings of Lord Buddha. I summarize it for you without a translator in your language, easily and directly. I've said it in your example, in your words. I've done this without no motivation to receive something, a gift, or anything from you. I came here simply, I felt that I need to come and give a talk to some people here. And those of you who have the fortune, with respect and to humility, to be here, you were meant to be here, you have the karma to listen. Those of you who are not able to will have to attend another time. But you have some affinity to hear these words that will change your life. Why would it change your life? Because I said it? No. Not because I said it. Because these words ring truth in your mind. Because with your logic and intelligence, you say, yes, that makes sense. You're not attracted to the teacher. You're not overwhelmed by the teacher. You're overwhelmed by the words. You're overwhelmed by the words because they make sense. You're overwhelmed by the words because you have the logic to say, yes, it makes sense. The next step is to do something. If we're going to be spiritual, we have to be spiritual. Spirituality is not being in a room chanting and praying and making offerings. Spirituality is being different than what we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Whatever we have attachment to, whatever we have desire toward, whatever we have grasping toward, we have to let go. We have to replace it with compassion, giving, openness, trusting. We have to. Because if we don't, what is the karma that we create? What will arise? Who can help us? Death is imminent. That should be our motivation.